We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We're continuing our Trump's legal trials, and we're here at the, what I would presume is probably the case that's captured America's attention the most. Scott DeCosenza joining us. And that is the Fulton County District Attorney, Fani Willis. Apparently I've pronounced that right. Not that it really matters, I suppose. Fani Willis prosecuting Donald J. Trump, but for election overthrowing crimes with the RICO statute.
Another prosecution, Mark, that is not political in any way. It's just about justice for the citizens of Fulton Judicial District in Georgia, and now all the citizens of the state of Georgia.
Lucky citizens of Fulton County and Georgia. Now, Scott, this case has been just a whirlwind recently with accusations and filings and responses, and it's quite the melodrama. This should be televised. This whole thing, the revolution will be televised. No, this should be serialized and turned into a new Falcon's Crest style show. Scott, give us the rundown of what's happening most recently in this case.
I believe Lorenzo Lamas is probably available if he's still alive. Well, the big news that came out was the filing of Fani Willis's disclosure about her relationship with Mr. Nathan Wade, the prosecutor.
That was a forced disclosure, though, right? She had to answer.
So one of the defendants, Donald Trump has many co-defendants.
Yeah, Mike
in the
Roman.
RICO case.
Yeah.
Excuse me?
Mike Roman.
Right, so Donald Trump has many co-defendants in his RICO case, and Mike Roman, his attorney, filed this challenge to the indictment, alleging that Fani Willis's extramarital affair with Nathan Wade and the financial relationship that her office has with him poisoned the indictment, among other things, and asked for a hearing. And the judge said, well, we'll see about the hearing, but first let's get Ms. Willis on the record. She declined to comment to the press, which was a new thing for her. She's very much interested in getting information about her case into the press, but not a defense of her own actions. She did go before a famous church in Atlanta, famous in the civil rights movement, and in a letter to God. Right. Yeah. That was discussed her travails and how she's been set upon by critics because of this prosecution, but basically disavowing any kind of poor behavior on her part. Then we have the disclosure, Mark. The disclosure to the court that she had a personal relationship. It actually was widely reported that she admitted having a sexual relationship, which I didn't take from the disclosure. And actually, that's an important point to drill down on. I think it was a mistake for her just not to admit it, if that is the nature of her relationship, because personal relationships are not the same as sexual relationships in terms of the level of bias and favoritism we might expect that would be on offer, right? For people that are physically intimate rather than just socially good friends. So in any case, that's one component of the filing. Another, and we've spoken about this, is the fantastically ham-fisted and amateurish way that she has chosen to try to prove the bona fides of her chosen prosecutor, Mr. Nathan Wade, whom she has paid a princely sum over and above what would be considered market rates for his services. Also, he's very likely totally 100% unqualified to bring this type of prosecution. That's part of the revelations we're talking about.
Something occurred to me with this. So Trump is facing, rather uniquely, a RICO charge, which is what they use to prosecute mafia bosses, because
the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act is where it takes its name.
So here's what's occurred to me, right? It's alleged that Willis began her affair in 2019, and the claims are that they have witnesses that they can prove this. So she hired Wade, a uniquely unqualified individual, to work a case, skipping the procedure of getting him approved by the Fulton County Board.
Let's just put a pin in that for a second and say she didn't hire him to be an employee of her office.
Sure.
She agreed
outside counsel
to hire him as outside counsel, meeting a very high fee structure.
So she hired him as an outside counsel for this, whilst having an affair with him, paying him top dollar, as you pointed out, presumably knowing that some of that would come back to her in the form of either nice evenings out, holidays, which apparently they've said that they have evidence for and witnesses for.
Mr.
Now, let me get to
does
this.
not.
Sorry. And so she would receive something from that relationship other than the companionship. Now, I'm not a legal scholar, but if someone somewhere were to suggest that Fani Willis be tried for a crime, I would suggest that that would be a RICO statute because she's receiving a benefit by a third party. Now, is that just my irony bone feeding me wrong think, or does that make any sense?
I'm sure that a politically motivated prosecutor who is a Republican who doesn't care about justice so much as politics, like I suspect Ms. Willis does, could bring that charge. I want you to know, though, that Mr. Nathan Wade doesn't spend all his money on haberdashery, and I think that he does spend quite a bit on trips for himself and Ms. Willis. So that's another component of the overall charges for people who haven't dialed in very closely, is that not only did she give this get her lover paid a lot of money, in itself a violation of legal ethics and what might prompt a dismissal of those indictments. But then there's the other matter that some of it actually came back to benefit her in the terms of lavish vacations and trips that Mr. Wade paid for her benefit.
She was just really wetting her beak, Scott.
I mean,
just wetting her beak.
It's all compounding, you know.
Sure.
It's one of those things where the closer you look at it, the more there is to see and be astonished at, I think.
So I got two follow-ups here, Scott. So first one is what happens next, essentially. But the second one, actually, let's do the second one first. So she, in her filing, she tried to explain the bona fides of Mr. Wade and why he was qualified.
Right.
Yeah, I think could you run those
so
by us,
staggering,
please?
Mark. I was howling laughing when I saw it because of what it revealed about Ms. Willis. My initial thought was that Mr. Trump should stop trying to get them to quit the prosecution, because the best thing that can happen for him is to go forward with an incompetent prosecutor. The reason why is because if Mr. Wade, so how this works, just a brief aside, is once the grand jury investigation is complete and they bring the charges, which is what has happened, the charges are brought in the name of the state of Georgia versus Donald Trump, right? Not the judicial count, not the Fulton County Judicial District or Ms. Willis personally, but the state of Georgia. So what happens is, if those prosecutors are tossed off the case, now the judge could say the indictment is bad and you have to go back to stage 1 or 0 rather, resetting the clock and presumably scuttling the charges altogether. Or they could say the charges will go forward, but without Mr. Wade or Ms. Willis being involved. If that happens, then a state prosecutor who has competency in RICO prosecution will be assigned by a kind of collective group of prosecutors. I think it's called the Georgia State Prosecutors Association. But that association, Mark, presumably will get a competent prosecutor to helm this case, who may actually be good at getting a conviction. And we know for sure that Ms. Willis' choice of Mr. Wade is not competent because of her filing. In order to justify his rate and saying that he's qualified to do this, among other things, they posted a picture of a Lucite award like you might get from a trophy store for $19 or $22.
That's $22 engraved.
and in 2019 dollars as well, sure. I think. So they have to consider that with the Biden inflation we're dealing with.
$6.
So like an award, a participation award, it would be like literally Another one of the presentations was like, if you were trying to get somebody certified as a firearms expert before a court and took a photograph of their NRA membership card, like somehow that was their bona fides. That's the level of it's staggering, Mark. And what I thought is staggering, not only that was the case, meaning that was the evidence that they were going to present, but that she doesn't understand how bad it makes her look. In other words, you presumably would post your best evidence of his qualifications in this type of thing. And if that's your best, oh my God.
Yeah, it shows a certain amount of, and I'm sure she's far smarter than me. She became the Fulton County DA, but it shows a level of naivety and a lack of understanding of optics, which politically is just, I mean, that's political suicide right there, I think, Scott. Scott DiCosenza, I want to thank you ever so much for being on the panel today, being the panel today, more like. We appreciate you being here. I hope you had as much fun as I have. Cheers.
I did. Thank you, Mark.
And that's all we have time for on this week's special edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'd like to thank Scott DiCosenza, host of the Uprising podcast, which you can check out at any good podcast provider or indeed on the page of libertynation.com, for joining us today and being the fount of all knowledge on all things legal and all things Donald Trump. And of course, I want to thank you at home, the listeners, for taking the time to tune in for what I hope you felt was an informative and fun edition. Thanks for being here. We'll catch you next week. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.